In the quiet corners of America, far from the crowded cities and constant noise, there are farmers who have given their entire lives to the land. Their mornings begin before sunrise, and their nights end long after the world has gone to sleep. Yet among these fields and barns lies a silent truth. An isolated life can feed the earth, but slowly starve the heart. This story reflects that truth like a mirror, showing the hidden cost of living alone with nature, away from community, away from connection. It is a reminder not only for American farmers, but for anyone who has ever chosen solitude over support. Sometimes nature heals, and sometimes it exposes the wounds we ignore. This is their wake-up call. Jacob Turner had lived alone on his family farm for 27 years. A stretch of time long enough for the seasons to carve themselves into the lines of his face and the rhythm of his heartbeat. His days began before the sun even considered rising, slipping into his boots with a quiet familiarity that no human voice had echoed in years. The farm awakened slowly the same way it always had, the groan of old wooden beams in the barn, the soft rustle of cattle shifting in their stalls, the wind brushing against the wheat like an old friend making its rounds. To Jacob, this silence was once comforting, almost sacred, a reminder that he belonged to the land more than he belonged anywhere else. But lately, the tranquility had begun to feel heavy, almost watchful, as if the fields themselves were waiting for him to notice something he had long ignored. He moved through his chores with practiced precision, the kind that comes only from years of repetition. Feed the cattle, check the irrigation lines, walk the perimeter fence. Each task flowed into the next, forming a loop that felt both predictable and endless. The land responded faithfully to his efforts. Crops grew tall, healthy, reliable. Yet despite the success of the farm, an invisible weight followed him. Sometimes, when the sun finally broke over the horizon and cast long golden rays across the field, he would pause longer than usual, his breath catching not from beauty, but from something hollow and unspoken stirring in his chest. He had grown used to having no one around. The absence of voices, laughter, conversation, it had all become a normal part of life. But as the years passed, the quiet stopped feeling peaceful and instead settled into his home like another resident, one that had moved in without permission. Evenings were the worst. After the day's labor was done, Jacob would sit at his small kitchen table, eating simple meals in silence. The hum of the old fridge and the ticking of the wall clock seemed to grow louder every year, filling the space where companionship might have lived. Plates clinked against the table, forks scraped. Chairs creaked, sounds that once meant nothing but now echoed with a sharp reminder of how alone he truly was. Sometimes he tried to push the feeling aside. He told himself that solitude was the price of being a good farmer, the cost of caring for the land with full devotion. It was what his father had done and his grandfather before him. Generations of Turners had lived this same isolated rhythm, convinced that the farm demanded so much attention there was little room for anything else. Jacob had inherited not just the property, but the lifestyle, the mindset, the quiet endurance. Yet he also inherited something his fathers had buried deep within themselves, an ache for connection that the soil could not soothe. When the townspeople held gatherings or community markets, Jacob stayed away. He would drive past the town square, see the clusters of people talking, laughing, exchanging goods and stories, and he felt like a stranger looking into a world he was no longer part of. He told himself he didn't need it. He had his animals, his crops, his land. Nature was a companion that never judged, never demanded, never disappointed. But it also never spoke back. It never asked him how he was doing. It never reminded him that his life was more than the boundaries of his fields. His body began to show signs of strain as the years rolled on. The early mornings felt heavier, the work more demanding. His joints ached from years of bending, lifting, harvesting. He rubbed his hands often, feeling the stiffness settling into his bones. The loneliness pressed deeper on him at night when he sat in his living room with only the dim glow of a single lamp. He stared at the dust-covered photographs of his family. His parents had passed long ago. His siblings had moved away, chasing lives filled with people and noise. Meanwhile, he stayed behind, married to the land. The silence that once comforted him now reminded him of everything he had lost without realizing it. There were moments when he stood outside at dusk, watching the sky melt from orange to purple, and wondered when the shift had happened, when peace had become isolation, when independence had become a burden. He remembered being younger, imagining a life where he would someday share the farm with someone else, a partner. Children running between the rows of corn. Family gathered around the table. But he had kept putting off the idea, telling himself there would be time later. The farm needed him. The animals depended on him. Seasons couldn't wait. And so, year after year, the dream drifted further out of reach until it felt like something he had imagined in another lifetime. His only interactions were with delivery drivers or the occasional mechanic who came to fix a stubborn tractor. Even then, conversations were brief, transactional, lacking the warmth of genuine human connection. Sometimes the drivers lingered, trying to spark small talk, but Jacob felt out of practice, as if his voice had grown rusty. Words didn't come easily anymore. Silence had become his native language. Then came the winter storm. It arrived without warning, rolling over the horizon with a force that stole the breath from the air. The wind howled through the fields, bending trees and sending a spray of snow across the land like shards of glass. Jacob rushed through the storm to secure the barn, struggling against the violent gusts. The cold bit into his skin, and for the first time in years, he felt genuinely afraid not for his property, but for himself. The realization settled heavily in his chest. If something happened to him out there, no one would know. No one would come. The land he had devoted his entire life to would not save him. The silence he had built around himself would swallow him whole. Inside the barn, as he fought to latch the doors, a moment of clarity broke through the chaos. He saw the truth he had ignored for decades, that solitude had not been strength, but surrender. He had given so much to nature that he had forgotten to give anything to his own humanity. The storm raged outside, but the real storm was inside him, a reckoning he could no longer avoid. The morning after the storm, Jacob Turner woke with a heaviness that felt different from the usual weight of long years and lonely work. It wasn't just fatigue. It was the lingering echo of the realization that had struck him in the barn, the clear understanding that he had been living on the edge of invisibility. As he pushed himself out of bed, the bruised sky outside his window told him the storm had passed, but the land still lay frozen and wounded. Fallen branches, scattered debris, and patches of ice shimmered across the fields. Yet the real damage had settled inside him, quiet and undeniable. He made coffee in silence, watching steam curl into the cold air of the kitchen. The storm had shown him something he couldn't ignore. He was alone in a way that was dangerous, not admirable. It wasn't that he suddenly disliked his life, but he finally saw how fragile it was. A single misstep, a fall, an accident no one would know for days, maybe weeks. The thought clung to him like frost. For the first time in a long while, his own life felt precious, and the idea of losing it unseen cut deeper than any winter wind. As he stepped outside, the world greeted him with a brittle calm. Snow crunched beneath his boots, the barn stood dented but standing, and the cattle huddled close together for warmth. Jacob checked on them carefully, whispering reassurances he rarely spoke aloud. The animals had always been his companions, but even they couldn't give him what he needed now. Last night's fear still pulsed in his bones. When he finished tending to the livestock, he stood at the edge of his property, looking toward the distant line of trees that separated his farm from the road leading into town. The thought of going there made him uneasy. He hadn't stepped into town for anything more than supplies in months, maybe a year, people would notice. They would ask questions. They would see the exhaustion in his face, the loneliness in his posture, the years he had spent talking only to the wind. Yet something in him nudged forward, telling him that this discomfort was the doorway to something he had forgotten how to seek. He walked back inside and reached for his coat, brushing dust from the shoulders. It felt unfamiliar on him, a reminder of a man who used to care about how he presented himself. As he grabbed his truck keys, he hesitated. The farm had always demanded his attention so completely that the idea of leaving it, even for a few hours, felt like a betrayal. But today, the farm felt different, quiet in a way that encouraged him rather than consumed him. As if it too knew he needed something beyond these fields. The drive into town was slow, the road still slick and uneven from the storm. Jacob kept both hands on the wheel, his jaw tight with nerves he couldn't shake. He passed familiar landmarks, the Miller barn, untouched and proud, the old wooden bridge painted with graffiti from decades ago, the wide, open stretch of land where wildflowers bloomed in warmer months. Each sight felt like a memory reaching out to him, reminding him that he didn't live at the edge of the world, even if it often felt that way. When he finally arrived in town, he parked near the general store, the same place he had avoided for nearly a year. Through the glass windows, he could see people moving around, talking, smiling, sharing stories over steaming cups of coffee at the small corner tables. That warmth, that easy companionship, made his throat tighten. He wiped his palms on his jeans and stepped inside. A small bell chimed at the door, and heads turned. For a heartbeat, Jacob felt exposed, as if the silence he carried around had followed him in. But then Mrs. Harper, who ran the store and had known him since he was a boy, gave him a wide smile. "Well, look who the storm blew in," she said gently. Jacob felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. It wasn't mockery. It was recognition. Someone saw him. "I needed a few things," he said, his voice rough from lack of use. Mrs. Harper nodded, studying him with the kind of concern that didn't pry but didn't ignore. "Good to see you, Jacob. Been too long." Others greeted him as he passed, simple nods, quiet hellos. No one demanded explanations or judged him for his absence. They welcomed him with kindness that loosened something inside him, something that had been held too tightly for far too many years. As he walked the aisles, choosing supplies he didn't entirely need, Jacob felt a strange lightness he hadn't felt in decades. The hum of conversation around him felt like music. The presence of people, even strangers, felt like a balm. It was then he realized how much he had deprived himself of the simplest, most basic human experiences. Being noticed, being acknowledged, being part of a shared world. When he reached the counter, Mrs. Harper leaned in slightly. "Storm do much damage?" "Some," Jacob answered. "I managed, but it made me think." She gave him a knowing look. "Storms tend to do that." For the rest of the day, Jacob worked on clearing debris and repairing damage. Yet his mind kept drifting back to the faces he'd seen, the voices he'd heard, the feeling of being part of something shared. The land had always been his anchor, but now he saw that it didn't have to be his prison. He didn't have to choose between nature and community. He could carry both. He could live in the quiet, but not disappear into it. The world outside his field still existed. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a pull toward it, a pull toward people, toward connection, toward a life that wasn't defined by isolation, but shaped by belonging.